This movie could have ended up as yet another failed adaptation featuring an animated monkey, but instead it became one of the greatest cinematic legends of all time. A story that began with rejections from every major studio and Hollywood star, ended in Oscar triumph and hundreds of millions at the box office. Movies Inside Out presents Forrest Gump is a 1994 tragicomedy directed by Robert Zemeckis about an oddball, played by Tom Hanks, who finds himself at the center of key historical events of the 20th century while living through personal heartbreak. How did the director secretly film crucial scenes against the producer's wishes? Which film nearly destroyed the project long before shooting began? Why did the studio consider it a failure despite phenomenal earnings? And how did the creators manage to make dead presidents talk to a living actor long before a modern artificial intelligence existed? All this and more in our new video. Ready? Then let's begin. The creation story. The story of Forrest Gump began in 1986. That's when Winston Groom's novel of the same name was published. But the journey from the pages of a book about an odd young man from Alabama to the big screen turned out to be far more winding than Forrest's own running routes. Even before the book was released, a real bidding war broke out over the film rights. Producers Wendy Feinerman and Steve Tisch teamed up with Warner Brothers, where Feinerman's husband, Mark Cantan, was head of production. However, the film ended up using only the first 11 chapters of the novel, then jumped straight to the ending with the Shrimp Company and Forrest Jr. The screenwriters also added details to Forrest's life that weren't in the book at all, like his childhood leg braces and the now iconic cross-country run. What's more, the book version of Forrest was far more, let's say, academically gifted, and even managed to become an astronaut, a professional wrestler, and a chess player.
Oh no. Uh-oh.
Honestly, the film version turned out to be much more human and touching. What do you think? But let's get back to how the novel became a cinematic legend. Groom was paid $500,000 for the rights and wrote the first 3 drafts of the screenplay, which stayed fairly close to the original book. Then something unexpected happened. After the success of Rain Man, a film centered around a character with savant syndrome, a rare condition where a person with general cognitive disability shows extraordinary skill in a specific area, Warner Brothers suddenly lost interest in Gump. Who needs another movie about a weirdo? They said. No one saw that coming. By 1990, Forrest Gump was stuck in development hell. Feinerman approached Columbia Pictures, but they also turned it down. That's when she hired Eric Roth to rewrite the script, a decision that turned out to be key to the film's future success. Roth and Feinerman kept in touch with Groom to make sure the screenplay stayed historically accurate. In 1992, Eric Roth presented a finished script that impressed Paramount Pictures chairwoman Sherry Lansing so much that she pulled the project over to her studio. The rights were bought from Warner Brothers in exchange for the script of executive decision. Not a bad deal, considering how successful Forrest Gump would become. But even with Paramount, problems persisted. Producers kept throwing wrenches into the process. But more on that later. Now about the directors. This part had its own mini-drama. Ivan Reitman, Penny Marshall, Edward Zwick, and even Terry Gilliam turned the project down. Barry Sonnenfeld was also attached for a while, but left to direct Addams Family Values. Finally, Robert Zemeckis came on board, but even he almost walked away. Just imagine, in the first script draft, Lieutenant Dan literally walked around with a thundercloud over his head. Seriously, the writers thought viewers wouldn't get the symbolism without a literal visual. Jenny was supposed to float around with actual angel wings. And the funniest part, Forrest was going to have an animated monkey running alongside him. That's actually why Zemeckis was invited to the project. He had just finished Who Framed Roger Rabbit and was considered an expert in blending live action and animation. The director agreed to make the film, but with one firm condition: no clouds, no wings, no monkeys. And he was absolutely right. And now, it's time for one of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes stories in film history: casting. Today, it's impossible to imagine anyone but Tom Hanks as Forrest Gump. But believe it or not, that wasn't always so obvious. The studio's first choice for the lead role was John Travolta. Years later, he admitted that turning it down was one of the biggest mistakes of his career. Robert Zemeckis, however, had envisioned Bill Paxton in the role, but the producers rejected him for not being a big enough star. As for Winston Groom, he imagined John Goodman playing Gump. Other actors considered included Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, Matthew Broderick, and Sean Penn. Interestingly, Penn would later explore a similar role in I Am Sam, 2001. Tom Hanks, on the other hand, fell in love with the project at first sight. After just 90 minutes of reading the script, he was ready to sign the contract. He had only one condition: no historical inaccuracies. But soon, a debate arose around the Southern accent.
Are you crazy? Or just plain stupid?
Stupid as stupid does, Mrs. Blue.
I guess.
Hanks initially wanted to soften Forrest's speech, making it sound less country. Then, something magical happened.
I mean, I'm no fabulous linguist, so I was trying to soft pedal it as much as possible and was really lost until Michael was cast as young Forrest.
All right, Forrest. You can open your eyes now.
A young boy named Michael Connor Humphreys came to audition. He would ultimately play young Forrest. Humphreys naturally spoke with a thick Southern accent.
What's wrong with your legs?
Oh, nothing at all, thank you. My legs are just fine and dandy.
Oh, nothing at all, thank you. My legs are just fine and dandy.
Hanks listened to the boy and decided to copy his manner of speaking, and it worked.
My name's Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump.
Like Hanks, Sally Field agreed to play Mrs. Gump right after reading the script. Interestingly, she played Forrest's mother even though she was only 10 years older than Hanks.
If God intended everybody to be the same, He'd have given us all braces on our legs.
Joe Pesci and Kevin Bacon were considered for the role of Lieutenant Dan Taylor, but it ultimately went to Gary Sinise. He drew inspiration from real Vietnam War veterans, many of whom were relatives of his wife.
Somebody in his family had fought and died in every single American war.
The role of Bubba Blue, played by Mykelti Williamson, was initially offered to David Alan Grier, Dave Chappelle, and even rappers Ice Cube and Tupac Shakur. Ice Cube didn't want to play an idiot, and Chappelle thought the movie would flop. He later admitted regretting that decision.
I'm gonna lean up against you, you just lean right back against me. This way we don't have to sleep with our heads in the mud.
And now, for Jenny. Robin Wright ended up delivering a brilliant performance, but she was far from the producer's first pick.
His name's Forrest.
Like me.
I named him after his daddy.
Jodie Foster and Demi Moore turned down the role immediately. The studio then leaned toward Nicole Kidman, who reportedly showed interest, but when asked to audition, she declined. Understandably so. By then, Kidman was already a big enough star not to have to prove herself to casting directors. Forrest Gump became a truly family project for many of its creators. Tom's younger brother, Jim Hanks, was his body double in the running scenes. Why did he need a double at all? We'll get to that later. Hanks' daughter, Elizabeth Hanks, appeared in the film as the red-haired girl on the school bus, who refuses to let young Forrest sit next to her. And remember the first boy who also refused Forrest a seat? That was the director's son, Alexander Zemeckis. As for young Forrest Jr. at the end of the film, that was Haley Joel Osment, the future star of The Sixth Sense.
I see dead people.
He was discovered completely by chance. A casting director spotted him in a Pizza Hut commercial. Another debut came from Hannah Hall, who played young Jenny and later went on to become a theater director. Elvis Presley was portrayed by Peter Dobson, but his voice was provided by Kurt Russell, though he wasn't even credited. And yes, that really was Dick Cavett, the legendary late-night talk show host, playing himself. And that's how the perfect Forrest Gump cast came together. Maybe you'd have liked to see different actors in the lead roles? Share your dream cast in the comments. The filming process. Filming for Forrest Gump began in August 1993 and wrapped up in December of the same year, just 4 months to create one of the most iconic movies in cinematic history. But the production quickly turned into a battle between the studio and the filmmakers. They had to fight for nearly every single scene. Here's the thing, shortly before filming started, Paramount decided the original budget was too large and cut it by $10 million. It got to the point where producers sent their executive Michelle Manning to the set, basically a financial watchdog. Her job was to make sure the shoot stayed within the newly reduced budget. Imagine that atmosphere? Zemeckis and Hanks made a desperate decision. They gave up part of their own salaries to save important scenes. But then, something incredible happened.
Now, my mom always told me that miracles happen every day. Some people don't think so, but they do.
Zemeckis simply ignored the restrictions and began filming the cross-country running scenes in secret, without the studio's knowledge. Oddly enough, Manning, the one assigned to monitor them, took their side and helped with this guerrilla-style operation. In most of the running scenes, it wasn't even Tom Hanks himself, but his younger brother Jim. When the studio finally discovered the conspiracy and saw the footage, they realized the team was right. The only thing missing was the famous scene in Monument Valley where Forrest stops and decides to go home. They had run out of money and the studio refused to cover it. But Hanks and Zemeckis were fighters. They filmed that scene out of their own pockets. The stretch of road where it was shot is now known as Forrest Gump Point.
I'm pretty tired. Think I'll go home now.
Although the story takes place in Alabama, filming mostly occurred in South Carolina. For example, the main street of the fictional town of Greenbow, which doesn't actually exist, was filmed in the town of Varnville. And now the most iconic location, Forrest tells his life story at the north end of Chippewa Square in Savannah, Georgia, while sitting on a bus stop bench. That bench wasn't really there. It was installed specifically for the movie. In fact, they even had to reverse traffic flow on the square so the bus doors would open directly in front of Forrest. Now let's talk about the legendary soundtrack. The original score was composed by Alan Silvestri, but Robert Zemeckis also wanted to include the most popular hits from each era, from Elvis Presley to Fleetwood Mac. But when he showed the list to the studio, they nearly fainted over the sky-high licensing costs. The studio accountants demanded cheaper alternatives, but Zemeckis had a clever plan. He kept all his favorite tracks in the temp score and showed the final cut to the executives. And guess what? When they saw how perfectly the music fit the scenes and captured the spirit of each decade, they gave in and paid for all the rights. And it paid off. The Forrest Gump soundtrack became one of the most popular in film history.
There's something happening here.
Now we move on to the part of the filmmaking process that literally changed how we think about what's possible in cinema. Visual effects were handled by Ken Ralston and his team at Industrial Light and Magic, the very same studio behind Star Wars and countless other greats. Using cutting-edge CGI, they did the impossible, made Forrest shake hands with long-dead historical figures, and witness the major events of the 20th century.
Where were you hit?
In the buttocks, sir.
Oh, that must be a sight. I'd kinda like to see that.
Tom Hanks was filmed against a blue screen with reference markers to align him with archival footage. Voice actors were filmed separately, and special effects teams then altered the lip movements of historical figures to sync with the new dialogue. One of the most impressive scenes, the Vietnam sequence where Forrest carries Bubba away from a napalm strike, was created using composite shots. First the stuntmen, then Hanks and Williamson, with Williamson suspended on a harness while Hanks ran carrying him. Believe it or not, the napalm explosion was real. It was filmed on land that was going to be cleared for a golf course. Because of the danger, they only had one shot. And guess what? Zemeckis left for the restroom during that crucial moment. He probably still regrets it. The most technically challenging effect was digitally removing Gary Sinise's legs after his character is injured. His legs were wrapped in blue fabric so they could be erased with CGI. The process was so painstaking, artists had to edit every frame by hand. Sinise suffered too. Illusionist Ricky Jay built him a special wheelchair with a hidden platform to conceal his legs. But it was so uncomfortable, he could sit in it for only 10 minutes at a time. And now, the real movie magic. The Lincoln Memorial scene in Washington, D.C. required a massive crowd. In reality, there were only about 1,500 extras. Here's the trick. For each new take, extras were rearranged and moved to different distances from the camera. Later, they were digitally duplicated to create a crowd of hundreds of thousands. The same technique was used for the stadium crowd shots. Even the ping pong balls were digital. Tom Hanks and his co-stars simply swung at air, and the ball was added later in post. The famous line,
"My name's Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump,"
was pure improv by Tom Hanks. Zemeckis loved it so much, he kept it in the movie. The scene with John Lennon on the Dick Cavett show hides a brilliant Easter egg. Forrest says the Chinese don't have anything and don't go to church.
"People hardly got nothing at all.
No possessions?
They never go to church.
No religion too?"
And Lennon responds by asking about the lack of property and religion. Cavett says,
"Hard to imagine."
Well, it's easy if you try, Dick.
The entire moment is a veiled reference to Lennon's hit song, Imagine.
It isn't hard to do.
Zemeckis intentionally never reveals what illness Jenny is dying from. Many assumed it was AIDS, and actress Robin Wright confirmed that interpretation in an interview. But in the book's sequel, the author states it was hepatitis C. The director believed the specific diagnosis didn't matter. It was the emotion and story that counted. And that's how Forrest Gump became a film made against its own studio's will, yet went on to bring them massive profits. Though, as you'll soon find out, the studio heads refused to admit it. Why and how that happened, you'll learn if you watch the video until the end. Movie mistakes and errors. Now let's take a closer look at the moments you may have missed while watching. Even in a masterpiece like Forrest Gump, there are a few small flaws and mistakes. And you know what? That only proves one thing. Behind every great film are regular people who sometimes mix things up or lose track of the details. Calendar confusion. When Forrest is standing at Jenny's grave, he says,
"You died on a Saturday morning."
If you look at the headstone, it clearly shows the date, March 22nd, 1982, which was a Monday. Also, Forrest claims his legendary run lasted 3 years and 2 months. But if you follow the timeline shown in the film, from Carter fainting to the Reagan assassination attempt,
Carter, suffering from heat exhaustion, fell into the arms.
It only spans about 1 year and 6 months. An iron with a mind of its own. In Jenny's apartment, a small miracle of home appliances occurs. The iron first stands upright on the ironing board, then mysteriously lies flat, and later stands up again, even though no one touches it. Seasonal confusion. In the scene at the Washington Monument, the trees behind Forrest are bare, like it's winter. The trees in front are green, like summer. And when Jenny drives off on the bus, it's already fall, with multicolored leaves. Magical transformations. The scene with President Kennedy gave us a funny little moment. His tie suddenly changes color from light to dark during their conversation. The reason is simple. Editors used footage from different events, but the result is still pretty amusing. And on New Year's Eve, TV host Dick Clark manages to change from a brown jacket to a blue one just by switching screens between the bar and Jenny's apartment. Lieutenant Dan's invisible legs. When Lieutenant Dan falls from his wheelchair, he gets up by pushing off with his invisible legs. This might be the most noticeable goof in the film, but Gary Sinise played the role so convincingly that most viewers don't even notice. Of course, none of these little errors spoil the viewing experience in the slightest. Forrest Gump is a film about big, meaningful things, and these technical flaws only add a bit of humanity to it. What mistakes did you spot in Forrest Gump? Share your discoveries in the comments. Deleted scenes and behind-the-scenes moments. Here's something interesting. Even a perfectly balanced film like Forrest Gump was originally even longer. Some scenes didn't make the theatrical cut due to runtime constraints, while others were removed from television airings because of censorship. Let's go behind the scenes and find out what we missed. When the studio slashed the budget, some scenes with historical figures had to be cut. One planned moment featured Forrest meeting Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where Forrest accidentally helps civil rights activists avoid an attack by angry dogs.
Quick flashback of young Forrest holding all these puppies, licking his face, because of course Forrest knows all these dogs too, like he knows everybody.
Another scene that didn't make the final cut showed Forrest playing ping pong with President George H.W. Bush. There are also known scenes that were never filmed or haven't surfaced publicly. One of the most dramatic would have explored Jenny's dark past. It was planned to show young Jenny killing her abusive father by releasing the handbrake on a tractor in a cornfield. Imagine the shock that would have caused. The creators decided the audience wouldn't forgive Jenny for such an act, no matter how monstrous her father was. And the alternate ending, that one hits hard. In it, Forrest shares his mother's famous wisdom about life being like a box of chocolates. But when little Forrest opens the box and pulls out a flavor guide, the metaphor about life's unpredictability collapses. The final shot shows Forrest looking directly into the camera, a tear rolling down his cheek. It would have been a much more somber ending, but the filmmakers opted for a more hopeful one.
My mama always said life was like a box of good and plenty. Most people just throw it away.
Interestingly, the scene where Forrest tells his story about the Vietnam War, but no one can hear him, was originally going to be very different. Zemeckis and Roth wanted Forrest to say something truly profound, but they could never agree on what that line should be. When the film aired on television, the censors got busy. One heavily altered scene was the encounter between the superintendent and Mrs. Gump. His moans were toned way down to avoid shocking family audiences. Even Forrest's facial expression in the dormitory scene was removed. It was apparently too expressive. Jenny's revealing nightclub performance was also heavily edited. Alternate takes and reframing were used to cover any hint of nudity. The famous bumper sticker reading "Shit happens" was changed to the innocent "It happens."
It happens. What, shit?
And all the other strong language was swapped out for more polite alternatives. And now, let's take a look at some of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes moments. Enjoy.
If I was going anywhere, I was running.
And cut. Tell me your favorite movie. Favorite. Most favorite of all time. Which is it?
It's not one with you in it.
I know, that's okay.
Jurassic Park.
See, now there you go.
Worldwide recognition. On July 6, 1994, Forrest Gump hit American theaters and literally turned the entertainment industry upside down. With a budget of $55 million, the film managed to gross nearly $330 million domestically and around $350 million internationally. Its total worldwide box office reached $678 million, the fourth highest grossing film of the 90s in the US and Canada. But here's a paradox of the Hollywood system. Despite such phenomenal earnings, the film was considered a successful failure. Due to high distributor and theater fees, Paramount reported a loss of $62 million. Welcome to the world of Hollywood accounting. And now for the most scandalous moment. Winston Groom was paid $350,000 for the script rights and promised 3% of the film's net profits. But the studio never paid him those royalties due to the alleged losses. The dispute with Paramount was settled later when Groom received a 7-figure contract for the rights to adapt his other book, Gump and Company. Eric Roth even wrote the script, but the film was never made. However, Hanks and Zemeckis couldn't be tricked so easily. When the studio slashed the budget, they gave up their fixed salaries in exchange for a percentage of the gross. In the end, the director earned about $40 million, and the star, a whopping $70 million.
We were sitting next to a millionaire.
Not only audiences, but most critics were also blown away by the film. Experts were especially impressed by Hank's performance, the film's magical tone, and its blend of an intimate story with an epic historical backdrop. Still, there were some who found Gump shallow and boring. At the 1995 Academy Awards, Forrest Gump won 6 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Visual Effects, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Editing, and of course, Best Actor, Hanks' second win in a row after Philadelphia. The film also received 3 Golden Globes, 2 Saturn Awards, and many other honors. In 2011, Forrest Gump was preserved in the National Film Registry, and it continues to rank high in lists of the greatest films of all time. The iconic quote,
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
was ranked 40th on the American Film Institute's list of the greatest movie quotes. However, in 2015, something surprising happened. The Hollywood Reporter surveyed hundreds of Academy members, asking them to re-vote on controversial decisions from the past. And guess what? The Academy members said that if they had a second chance, they would have awarded the 1994 Best Picture Oscar to The Shawshank Redemption. And what happened to the main stars of this cinematic fairy tale? Tom Hanks remains one of the top actors of his generation. Robin Wright became a star of House of Cards on Netflix and later tried her hand at directing. Gary Sinise, in addition to working in film and TV, actively tours with his band, Lieutenant Dan Band, which raises money to support veterans. Mykelti Williamson, like most of the cast, continues to work in movies. Robert Zemeckis collaborated with Hanks several more times and directed many acclaimed films, though he was never able to match the success of Gump. Here's a real surprise. Forrest Gump gave birth to an entire restaurant empire. In 1996, the first Bubba Gump Shrimp Company opened in Monterey, California. Today, the chain includes 31 restaurants worldwide, from the US to Japan and China.
Shrimp is the fruit of the sea. You can barbecue it, boil it, deep fry, stir fry.
There's potatoes, shrimp burger, shrimp sandwich. That's about it.
In 2022, an Indian remake of Zemeckis' film titled Lal Singh Chadha, starring Amir Khan, was released. And with the rise of artificial intelligence, fake trailers for sequels starring Tom Holland and Timothée Chalamet began to surface. Hanks himself admitted he was glad a sequel was never made. The original didn't need one. But who knows? Maybe Forrest Gump will get a reboot someday. Would you like to see a sequel or remake of Forrest Gump?